destination, but about returning home to the love and peace that reside within each of us. It's a journey of self-discovery, of peeling away the layers of ego, fear, and ignorance that separate us from our true nature. In this sacred encounter, the Buddha's teachings emerged in Anne's consciousness, guiding her thoughts toward the nature of suffering. She remembered the Four Noble Truths, the foundation of Buddhist wisdom, that explained the cause of suffering and, most importantly, the path out of it. The Buddha's words echoed in her mind. Life is suffering. Suffering is caused by attachment. The way to end suffering is through the cessation of attachment. The Eightfold Path leads us to the end of suffering. And now understood, her experience in the divine realm was not just a random vision or a moment of fleeting enlightenment, it was a direct, personal lesson that aligned perfectly with Buddhist teachings. Just as the Buddha had found peace by letting go of attachments and desires, so too had Anne been shown a glimpse of eternal peace by surrendering her need for control and fear. In that moment of realization, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Her near-death experience was not just a miraculous event, it was a teaching moment, one that had bridged the wisdom of Christ and Buddha, uniting the core truths of both paths into a singular experience of love and awakening, and also recognized the profound connection between suffering and compassion. The Buddha taught that by embracing suffering, understanding it, and offering compassion to ourselves and others, we could transcend it. Likewise, Jesus taught that through love, forgiveness, and grace, we could overcome any challenge. Anne's heart swelled with understanding. These teachings weren't separate, they were simply two expressions of the same universal truth. In this part, Anne's near-death experience begins to unravel a deeper spiritual truth, connecting the teachings of Christ and the Buddha. Her encounter symbolizes the convergence of two profound paths of wisdom, showing that the essence of all spiritual teachings lies in love, compassion, and self-awareness. This realization sets the stage for the next phase of her journey, where these revelations will continue to shape her life and understanding of the world. Part 3. The Integration, Living the Truth. Anne's heart was still heavy with the sacred truths she had just uncovered. The encounter with Christ and the realization of the Buddha's teachings were not mere intellectual understandings. They were profound shifts in her soul, changes that demanded transformation in how she lived her life. The love and peace she had felt were not to be kept in the ethereal realm of her near-death experience, they were to be embodied in her daily life. She knew now that her spiritual awakening was only meaningful if it manifested through action, in every moment of every day. As Anne returned to the world of the living, everything seemed different. The once mundane routine of daily life now felt like a sacred opportunity to practice what she had learned. The world was no longer a place of confusion and chaos, but a vast, interconnected network of souls, all walking their paths toward understanding, compassion, and peace. She began to understand that love was not simply an abstract idea, it was an action, a way of being. The love Christ spoke of was patient, kind, and all-encompassing. But the Buddha had also taught her that love must be coupled with wisdom. And wisdom was found in understanding the impermanent nature of everything, be it pain, pleasure, success, or failure. Everything, she realized, was fleeting, and started to embrace the impermanence of her own life. She stopped holding on to the past, to regrets and mistakes. Instead, she focused on being present, on truly experiencing each moment, without attachment or fear of what might come next. With each passing day, she felt herself growing into the person she was always meant to be, calm, compassionate, and deeply aware of the beauty in the smallest details of life. At work, she practiced being mindful. She saw her colleagues not as separate individuals, but as fellow travelers on the same journey. She smiled more often, listened more attentively, and responded with kindness rather than irritation. Her relationships became deeper, more meaningful, instead of reacting from a place of ego or fear, and began to respond with understanding, patience, and love. Her family life also began to change. She no longer viewed her role as a mother or wife as something to be perfectly fulfilled, but as an opportunity to practice compassion and mindfulness. She stopped trying to control everything and allowed her loved ones the space to be who they were, just as she learned to embrace herself in her quiet moments, and often reflected on the Buddha's teaching on the Four Noble Truths, especially the importance of letting go of attachments. Through this lens, she began to understand that even her attachment to expectations for her family's happiness or success could cause her suffering. She also saw the connection between Christ's teaching on forgiveness and the Buddha's practice of loving kindness, metta. Both teachings emphasized the importance of letting go of anger, resentment, and judgment by forgiving herself and others, and began to experience a sense of liberation that went beyond mere intellectual understanding. It was freedom in her heart, a freedom that grew every time she chose love over fear, kindness over anger, and patience over frustration. But it wasn't all easy. There were times when Anne found herself slipping back into old patterns. Her ego would sometimes resurface, especially when she felt threatened, misunderstood, or rejected. In those moments, she would remind herself of the Buddha's wisdom: when the mind is pure, joy follows like a shadow that never leaves. She would center herself in that truth, return to the present moment, and breathe deeply. She learned to let go of her attachment to being right or to controlling outcomes. And through it all, Anne felt a deeper sense of peace, a peace that came from no longer fighting with life, but instead accepting it as it was, in all its beauty and imperfection. She no longer felt the need to search for happiness outside of herself. It was here, in the quiet moments, in the small acts of kindness, in the present moment, that she found true peace. As Anne grew in her understanding, she realized that her journey was not about achieving perfection, but about practice. Every day, she worked to embody the teachings of both Christ and the Buddha: love, compassion, forgiveness, and mindfulness. And every day, she made mistakes, but those mistakes no longer defined her. What mattered was her intention, her willingness to return to the path with every step she took. No matter how many times she stumbled, her life had become a beautiful dance between two ancient paths, one rooted in the divine love of Christ and the other in the wisdom of the Buddha. These teachings, once separate in her mind, were now seamlessly woven together, guiding her every step. And in that balance, Anne found herself not just living the truth, but becoming the truth itself. In this part, Anne's journey towards integrating the profound wisdom she encountered is explored. It emphasizes the practical application of both Christian and Buddhist teachings in everyday life. The challenge of transforming one's life through mindful actions, forgiveness, love, and acceptance of impermanence is at the heart of this section. Anne's experience highlights the dynamic interplay between wisdom and love, showing how these universal truths can be applied to daily living, creating a more peaceful and compassionate existence. Part 4: The Trial: Embracing Suffering with Grace. As the months passed, Anne's life continued to shift. The clarity she had gained from her spiritual awakening didn't just lead to peace, it also brought her face to face with a deeper understanding of suffering. One of the fundamental teachings both Christ and the Buddha shared was the inevitability of suffering. Yet, while suffering is universal, the way we respond to it can either deepen our pain or lead to liberation. For Anne, the test came unexpectedly. One morning, she received the news that her beloved mother, who had been battling a long-term illness, had taken a sudden turn for the worse. The doctors were uncertain, and it seemed her time on earth was quickly running out. Anne rushed to her mother's side, her heart heavy with grief and fear. She had always admired her mother's strength, and the thought of losing her brought a deep ache to her soul. Standing by her mother's bedside, Anne found herself struggling. The peaceful acceptance she had been cultivating seemed to slip through her fingers in the face of this deep loss. She remembered the Buddha's teaching that all things are impermanent, but the reality of losing someone she loved so dearly felt like an unbearable weight. The love she felt for her mother, and the fear of her passing, seemed to clash within her heart. As she sat there, holding her mother's hand, Anne was struck by a thought that seemed to arise from deep within her soul: this pain, this fear, this is the very thing that must be embraced. This is the moment that teaches me how to live the truth I have learned. Anne began to recall Christ's own suffering, how he had faced the agony of crucifixion, not in the absence of pain, but in full awareness of it. Christ had shown her that even in the darkest of moments, love could transcend the suffering. And the Buddha, too, had spoken of embracing suffering, not as something to be avoided, but as something that, when understood, could bring about great transformation. She closed her eyes, focused on her breath, and centered herself in the present moment. She realized that her fear and sorrow were simply the mind's response to the idea of loss. But her true self, her deeper consciousness, was connected to something eternal, something beyond the physical realm. The body might fade, but the love, the lessons, and the spirit lived on. Anne whispered a prayer for her mother, one that combined the love of Christ and the wisdom of the Buddha. She prayed for her mother's peaceful transition, that she might be free from pain and suffering. And in that moment, she also realized she was praying for herself. She was learning, right there, how to let go, not of her love for her mother, but of the attachment to how that love should manifest. She didn't need to control the outcome. She only needed to love, to be present, and to accept. As the days passed, her mother's condition worsened, but Anne felt a strange sense of peace. She stayed at her mother's side, not with the fear of impending loss, but with the quiet understanding that this was a natural part of the journey. The pain of separation was real, but it didn't have to define her experience. She could grieve, yes, but she could also celebrate the love and wisdom her mother had imparted to her throughout her life. In the final moments, when her mother passed away peacefully in her sleep, Anne felt both heartbroken and deeply grateful. She had been given the opportunity to practice what she had learned, the teachings of love, acceptance, and impermanence. She had witnessed the passing of a loved one not as an end, but as a transformation, a return to the source from which all beings came. As she sat by her mother's side after her passing, Anne felt a sense of surrender and grace wash over her. The tears still flowed, but they were no longer tears of helplessness or despair. They were tears of acceptance, of understanding that love was not bound by time or space, and that true peace came from accepting all that life brings, with an open heart. In the days that followed, Anne found herself reflecting on the Buddha's teachings about the Four Noble Truths: the truth of suffering, the truth of its cause, the truth of its cessation, and the truth of the path that leads to freedom. She saw how the suffering she had experienced in losing her mother was not separate from the wisdom she had been cultivating. It was, in fact, a vital part of the process of awakening. The Buddha's teaching on suffering had never felt more real to her. She understood now that the cause of suffering was not the inevitable pain of life, but her attachment to it, her desire to keep things as they were, to avoid change, to control the uncontrollable. But true freedom, she realized, came from accepting life as it was, in all its impermanence and unpredictability. And Christ, too, had shown her that love and sacrifice were the highest paths to spiritual awakening. In those moments of suffering, in the pain of losing someone dear, she had the chance to practice love in its purest form, unconditional and without attachment. The love she had for her mother transcended death because it was rooted not in the fleeting moments of life, but in the eternal presence of the divine. And understanding deepened. Suffering was not something to avoid, but something to be embraced. It was the soil in which wisdom and compassion grew. And it was in the very act of facing suffering that she could experience the true freedom that both Christ and the Buddha spoke of, the freedom that comes when the heart is willing to love, even in the face of loss, and when the mind is willing to let go of its need for control. Part 4 brings into a moment of profound realization. In the face of personal suffering, her mother's impending death, she faces the teachings of both Christ and the Buddha. Rather than resisting or resenting her pain, she learns to embrace it, understanding that suffering is an integral part of the spiritual journey. This part highlights the transformative power of love, acceptance, and understanding, as Anne's faith and wisdom deepen in the face of loss. Part 5, The Awakening, Living with Compassion and Service. Anne's journey had reached a critical juncture. She had passed through a trial of immense personal loss, and in that space of suffering, she had learned profound truths about life, love, and impermanence. But as the days turned into weeks and months, she began to realize that her spiritual awakening was not simply about understanding suffering, it was also about the power of compassion and the impo. After her mother's passing, Anne felt an intense shift in her heart. The grief was still present, but it had changed. It no longer felt like an unending storm. Instead, it had become a quiet undercurrent of love, one that reminded her of the preciousness of life. She had learned that all beings, whether human or animal, are connected through shared experiences of suffering, joy, and the inevitable nature of change. One afternoon, while walking through the park near her home, Anne noticed an elderly man sitting alone on a bench. His eyes seemed distant, as if lost in thought or perhaps in a memory. Something about him caught her attention, and instinctively, she walked over to greet him. He looked up, slightly startled, and then smiled warmly. "Hello," she said softly. "Mind if I sit with you for a while?" The man nodded, his weathered face softening. "Of course, my dear. It's not often I have company these days." As they sat together, they began to talk. The man, named Harold, shared stories of his youth, of a time when he had been full of dreams and ambitions. He spoke of a wife he had lost to illness many years ago, and the loneliness he had felt ever since. But Anne was not there to pity him, she was there to listen. She knew that deep listening, free from judgment, was one of the most powerful acts of compassion. As he spoke, she didn't just hear his words, she felt his pain, his loneliness, and his longing for connection. Something stirred within Anne's heart. She felt a deep sense of kinship with Harold, not because of their shared sorrow, but because of the shared human experience. As she looked at him, she saw not just an elderly man, but a fellow traveler on the same path of impermanence, searching for meaning and connection. The conversation turned to spirituality. Annan found herself sharing some of the wisdom she had learned from both Christ and the Buddha. She spoke of the importance of compassion, of the love that transcends suffering, and of how one could find peace not by avoiding the hardships of life, but by fully embracing them. Harold listened attentively, nodding slowly. "Thank you," he said after a long pause. "I've never quite heard things put that way before. It's good to know that someone else feels the same way, even if we walk different paths." Anne smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. It wasn't about convincing Harold to follow her beliefs, or about preaching. It was about sharing a moment of understanding, of connection. She had learned that true compassion was not about giving advice, but about offering presence, simply being there for someone, acknowledging their pain, and reminding them that they were not alone. This encounter, so seemingly simple, became a turning point for Anne. She understood that her spiritual awakening was not meant to remain a private journey. The wisdom she had received, of love, acceptance, and letting go, was meant to be shared with the world. Compassion was not a passive feeling, it was an active force. A force that could transform not just her own life, but the lives of others. For the next few weeks, Anne continued to visit Harold. Their talks became more profound, delving deeper into the nature of life, death, and the divine, and began to realize that the spiritual wisdom she had gained needed to be translated into action. It was not enough to sit in quiet meditation or to reflect on the teachings in solitude. She needed to live them. She decided to take a more active role in her community. She volunteered at a local homeless shelter, offering both her time and her heart to those in need. She became involved in local outreach programs, helping people find connection, comfort, and care in the midst of their struggles. Her work was not about saving anyone or fixing their problems, it was about being present, about offering her heart in a world that often seemed to be missing love. At the same time, Anne continued her studies of both Christ's teachings and the Buddha's wisdom. She found that the more she shared with others, the more she learned. Each person she encountered, whether they were struggling with addiction, homelessness, or personal loss, became a teacher in their own right. Through them, she saw the depths of human suffering, but she also saw their resilience, their capacity for transformation, and reflected on the words of Christ, who had taught that love your neighbor as yourself was the greatest commandment. But she also thought of the Buddha's wisdom on compassion, on extending love not just to those who were easy to love, but to those who were suffering, struggling, or even angry. She found herself in a constant state of learning about herself, about others, and about the boundless nature of compassion. Her understanding of love deepened. She began to see that love was not a finite resource, but an infinite wellspring, constantly replenished by giving. Each act of kindness, no matter how small, brought her closer to the essence of who she was. It was not about making herself feel good or gaining praise. It was about opening her heart, about becoming a conduit for love in a world that needed it more than ever. Through her work, Anne discovered that there was no perfect moment to begin living her spiritual truth. It was not about waiting for a grand epiphany or a life-altering event. It was about showing up, day after day, with an open heart and a willingness to serve. One evening, as she sat on her porch after a long day of volunteering, and looked up at the sky, the stars were twinkling in the distance. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had embraced her role in the world, not as a teacher, not as someone with all the answers, but as a humble student of life. And she realized that this was the greatest gift she could offer to others, her willingness to love, without expectation, without limitation, and without condition. Part 5 illustrates Anne's transformation from a seeker of wisdom to a practitioner of compassion. After experiencing personal loss and suffering, she finds her purpose in serving others, recognizing that true spiritual awakening is not just about personal enlightenment, but also about actively contributing to the well-being of others. This part highlights the importance of love and compassion in action, teaching us that spiritual growth must manifest through service, presence, and connection with those around us. Part 6, The Circle of Life, embracing the flow of impermanence. Anne's journey had brought her to a place of inner peace. But it wasn't a peaceful life free of challenges. Rather, it was a peace born from an understanding of impermanence, the recognition that everything in life is transient. She had learned that true tranquility did not come from escaping suffering or avoiding change, but from embracing the flow of life, with all its uncertainties, challenges, and surprises. One evening, as she sat in her meditation space and reflected on the lessons she had learned over the past few years, she thought of the time when her mother had passed away. How painful it had been to face the end of such an important chapter in her life. She thought of Harold, the elderly man she had befriended, and how their shared moments had helped her see the beauty in connecting with others, no matter their age, status, or circumstances, and had come to understand that impermanence was not just about the end of life, it was about the constant cycle of birth, growth, decay, and renewal. Everything was in a state of becoming, and with each ending came the potential for a new beginning. The seasons changed, just as the stages of life did. Death was not something to fear or avoid, it was simply part of the natural cycle. A transformation that led to something new, something unknown. This realization deepened her understanding of both Buddhism and Christianity. In Buddhism, the concept of impermanence, anicca, was central. The Buddha had taught that everything in life was in a constant state of flux, and that attachment to things, people, or even ideas could lead to suffering. To truly find peace, one had to accept change and cultivate a deep understanding of the transient nature of all things. In Christ's teachings, Anne found a similar message, though expressed differently. Christ had spoken of the kingdom of God, where nothing in this world remained as it was, but through faith and love, transformation could happen. He had also embraced the inevitability of death, offering a way to transcend it through resurrection. In both traditions, there was a deep understanding that death was not the end, but part of the continuous cycle of life, a passage that could be faced with grace and understanding. As Anne embraced the flow of life's cycles, she began to see the beauty in every phase of existence. She started to see aging not as a sign of decline, but as a sign of growth, a deepening of wisdom, a broadening of experience. She embraced her own aging process, no longer fearing it or resisting it. She was learning to live fully in each moment, appreciating the impermanence of life while also honoring its preciousness. One afternoon, while volunteering at a local community center, Anne met a woman named Clara. Clara was in her late 60s, a vibrant woman with a deep love for gardening. She had been widowed for several years, and although she had experienced her own share of pain, she carried herself with a quiet joy that Anne found contagious. As they worked together in the garden, and noticed how Clara spoke about her late husband with both sorrow and a sense of gratitude. She didn't shy away from the pain of loss, but she didn't let it define her either. She spoke of the years they had spent together with tenderness, and then shifted to talk about the flowers they had planted together, the seeds they had sown, and the life they had nurtured. Life is a garden, isn't it? Clara mused as they planted a row of tulips. We plant the seeds, we nurture them, and we watch them grow. And when the flowers bloom, we get to enjoy their beauty for a time. But we also know that the petals will fall. It's all part of the cycle. The important thing is not how long the bloom lasts, but how fully we experienced it while it was here. And smiled, feeling a deep resonance with Clara's words. It was true. Life was like a garden, full of seasons, some filled with joy and abundance, others with pain and loss. But each season was essential. The winter prepared the soil for new growth in the spring, and even the withering of flowers in the fall was necessary for the renewal that would come. And found herself thinking more about this cycle. Just as the flowers were born, bloomed, and faded, so too did people. Birth and death were not separate events, but part of the same continuum. The key was not to fear the changes, but to embrace them fully, to live fully in the present moment, savoring each experience while letting go of attachment to how things should be or how long they should last. As Anne's understanding deepened, she became more attuned to the rhythms of the world around her. She found herself feeling more connected to nature, to the ebb and flow of life. She began to feel the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, the heartbeat of humanity in the faces she encountered, and the pulse of the universe in every breath she took. The interconnectedness of all things became more apparent to her, and she no longer saw herself as separate from the world. She was part of it, a small but essential thread in the vast, beautiful tapestry of existence. But even as she felt a deep sense of peace, and was aware that the world around her was not always in harmony, there was still suffering, still inequality, and still pain. There were wars, injustices, and struggles that threatened to overwhelm the light of compassion she had worked so hard to nurture. And yet, Anne knew that the answer to these problems was not to withdraw into her own peace or to become overwhelmed by the darkness of the world. The answer lay in acting with compassion, in embodying love in every moment, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem. One evening, as Anne walked home from the community center, she passed by a young man sitting on the sidewalk. His head hung low. He looked lost, disheveled, and weary from the struggles of life, and felt a deep pull in her heart. And without hesitation, she approached him. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, kneeling down beside him. The young man looked up, surprised by the kindness in her voice. "I'm not sure," he replied. I don't know where to go anymore." And sat with him for a while, listening to his story. He had lost his job, his apartment, and his hope. He felt like life had turned its back on him, and he was unsure how to move forward, and didn't offer quick solutions or platitudes. She didn't try to fix his problems. She simply listened, offered comfort, and reminded him that he wasn't alone, that the cycle of life, with its ups and downs, was something everyone experienced. By the end of their conversation, the young man's shoulders had relaxed, and there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He thanked him before walking away, his step a little lighter than before, and watched him go, feeling grateful for the opportunity to be a part of his journey. She realized that life was not about avoiding hardship or seeking a perfect existence. It was about finding meaning and purpose through the cycle of impermanence. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, was a seed planted in the garden of the world. And every moment of understanding brought the world one step closer to healing. Part 6 illustrates Anne's deepening realization that impermanence is not something to fear, but something to embrace. She learns to find beauty and purpose in each moment, in each cycle of life, through her interactions with others, especially Clara and the young man on the street. She becomes more attuned to the interconnectedness of all beings. Her journey is now one of living in alignment with the natural rhythms of life, understanding that love and compassion are the seeds that can transform the world. Part 7, The Awakening of Compassion, the Power of Small Acts. As the years went by, Anne's journey became less about seeking answers and more about living those answers in her daily life. Her once cautious approach to spirituality had transformed into a bold, active commitment to understanding the nature of love and compassion. It was not just a philosophical pursuit, it was something she now lived and breathed with every step, every choice, and every action. One afternoon, Anne was invited to lead a meditation session at a local center. It was an opportunity she had not expected. And at first, she felt the usual waves of doubt creep in. What if she wasn't enough? What if her words didn't resonate? But something inside her had changed over the years. She now knew that her role was not to be perfect or to have all the answers, but simply to be a vessel of presence, to offer others a space where they could connect with themselves. Standing in front of the small group of meditators, Anne took a deep breath and shared her thoughts. "I've spent many years searching for the answers to life's greatest questions," she began. "I've sought peace, wisdom, and enlightenment. And at times, I thought I found them in grand ideas or profound teachings. But I've come to realize that the deepest truth is not found in philosophies or grand experiences. It's found in the small moments, in the simple acts of kindness, in the way we treat each other, and in how we love ourselves." She spoke about the power of small, everyday acts, offering a kind word, being present for someone in need, forgiving ourselves for past mistakes. She explained that true compassion was not about grand gestures, but about the consistent, quiet moments where we choose to show up for others and ourselves. After the session, one of the attendees, a woman named Sarah, came up to Anne. "I've been struggling with forgiveness for years," she confessed. "I've been holding on to so much anger towards someone in my life. I feel like I can't let go." Anne smiled gently. "Forgiveness is a journey, not a destination," she said. "It doesn't mean forgetting what happened or excusing the pain. It means freeing yourself from the burden of carrying that weight. It's a gift you give yourself, not the other person." Sarah nodded, looking down, as if something deep inside her had clicked. "I think I'm ready to start that journey," she said softly. Anne could see the shift in Sarah's energy, a subtle but powerful transformation. It was a moment that made her realize that change didn't always come in sudden bursts of revelation. Sometimes, it was the quiet, slow shifts that mattered most, the shifts that allowed people to begin to heal, to start walking down a new path of understanding. Later that week, Anne met with Harold again, the elderly man who had taught her so much about the simple beauty of life. They sat together in his favorite park, watching the birds fluttering by, and talked about the changes they had witnessed in each other. "Anne, you've come so far," Harold said with a smile. "I see the light in you now. It's not the same light as before, it's deeper, more grounded, You've learned to live with the flow, haven't you? And nodded, her heart full of gratitude for the wisdom that Harold had shared with her over the years. I used to think that the point of life was to achieve something, spiritual enlightenment, happiness, or success, and said, but I've learned that the point of life is simply to be present, to be compassionate, to be in the flow of life. It's not about achieving anything. It's about allowing yourself to experience life fully, without judgment or attachment. Harold chuckled softly. I think that's the greatest wisdom of all. And the moment we stop striving, we begin to truly live. The moment we let go of control, we can finally open ourselves to the gifts life offers. In that moment, and realized that her own path was not a linear journey of progression, but a cyclical one, much like the seasons, where growth and decay were intimately connected. The more she embraced impermanence, the more she saw the beauty in the temporary nature of life. The more she embraced the flow, the more she learned to find peace in the midst of uncertainty. Later that year, Anne took a trip to a remote mountain village, where she had the opportunity to teach meditation to a group of villagers. Many of them were struggling with hardship, financial instability, illness, and the challenges of rural life. But when Anne arrived, she was struck by the warmth and kindness of the people. They welcomed her with open arms, eager to learn and share in the practice of meditation. One evening, as Anne led a session beneath the stars, she spoke about the importance of compassion, both for oneself and for others. True compassion is not about giving to others in a way that depletes you, she explained. It's about offering what you can, from a place of fullness, from a place of love. When we give with love, we are not drained, we are nourished. After the session, a young woman named Mai approached Anne. I've been struggling with my family, she said. I love them, but I often feel resentful of the burden I carry. I take care of them, but I don't know how to do it without feeling so tired and overwhelmed. Anne looked at Mai, seeing the deep care in her eyes. The love you have for your family is beautiful, she said. But you must also love yourself. You cannot pour from an empty cup. Make sure you fill your cup first, so that when you give, you are giving from a place of abundance, not depletion. Mai nodded, a weight lifting from her shoulders as she absorbed Anne's words. I understand, she whispered. I need to take care of myself, too. Anne smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment that came not from teaching, but from witnessing the shift in others. It was these small moments, when people began to see themselves with more kindness, when they realized their own worth, that truly mattered. It was the quiet, unspoken transformations that were the most profound. As Anne's journey continued, she became more attuned to the subtle power of small acts of kindness. She understood that change did not need to be dramatic or world-changing to be significant. The world was transformed by millions of tiny, everyday moments where people chose to show compassion, to be present, to love unconditionally. In the years that followed, Anne lived her life with this understanding. She no longer sought perfection or the idealized vision of enlightenment. Instead, she focused on the present moment, the small acts of kindness, the simple words of encouragement, the deep connections with others that created lasting impact. It was these simple things that formed the true foundation of a compassionate, meaningful life. And in this way, Anne found the deepest peace, not in the absence of suffering, but in the fullness of life itself. In all its joys and sorrows, she had awakened to the truth that life was not about achieving greatness, it was about living with grace, kindness, and an open heart. embracing the flow of existence with all its beauty and impermanence. Part 8. The Universal Truth, Bridging Buddhist and Christian Teachings. As An continued her journey of self-discovery, she realized that the teachings of Buddhism and Christianity, although originating from different traditions, were not as disparate as they initially seemed. In fact, both paths shared a profound core: the quest for love, compassion, and inner peace. The wisdom of the Buddha, and recalled the teachings of the Buddha, particularly his emphasis on the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. At the heart of Buddhist philosophy is the understanding that suffering is an inherent part of life, but it is not something we must passively accept. Through mindful living, awareness, and cultivating positive qualities like right speech, right action, and right livelihood, suffering can be mitigated. Buddhism emphasizes that true happiness comes from liberation from the cycle of desire and attachment. And in this liberation, there is peace. The Buddha's teachings on compassion were especially poignant to An. She understood that cultivating love and kindness toward oneself and others was an essential part of freeing oneself from the shackles of suffering. The love of Christ, in a similar vein, and reflected on the teachings of Jesus Christ. Jesus' central message was one of love, love for God, love for others, and love for oneself. His life was an embodiment of self-sacrifice, forgiveness, and unconditional love. Jesus taught that the key to spiritual growth was to love without conditions, to serve others humbly, and to forgive even when it seemed impossible. Christ's message of loving one's neighbor as oneself resonated deeply with An. She began to see that love was not just an emotion but an active choice, a choice to be present, to offer kindness, and to forgive. The common thread. What struck An most was how similar the essential messages of both traditions were. Buddhism teaches that by cultivating compassion and letting go of self-centeredness, we can overcome suffering. Christianity, too, calls for selflessness and love through loving others. We transcend our ego and our fear, and saw that both traditions shared a belief in the power of love, the transformation of the heart, and the importance of serving others. In Buddhism, the focus was on mental liberation, and in Christianity, it was about loving in action. Following the example of Christ, An's awakening with these realizations, and felt a deep sense of peace. She had begun to understand that the core of both Buddhism and Christianity was the cultivation of love and compassion. Both paths, in their own way, aim to help individuals overcome the illusion of separation and connect to a greater sense of unity with all beings. The Buddha's teachings on impermanence reminded An to cherish each moment and recognize that nothing lasts forever. Christ's call to love others as oneself reinforced the importance of self-compassion and unconditional love for those around her. She had found a bridge between the two paths, one that honored the essence of each while integrating them into a holistic understanding of love, compassion, and spiritual awakening. An was no longer simply a seeker of truth. She had become a practitioner, embodying the love she had learned about in both Buddhism and Christianity. She was discovering that the two traditions were not mutually exclusive but rather complementary, offering a more complete picture of the transformative power of love. Part 9. The Legacy of Love, An's Final Reflections. As An reflected on the journey she had traveled, she felt a profound sense of peace and gratitude. Her path had not been easy, it had been marked by pain, loss, and moments of deep questioning. Yet, it was precisely these challenges that had brought her to where she was now, a place of clarity, compassion, and love. Looking back on the journey, An thought about the many lessons life had taught her. She remembered the car accident that changed her life forever. The near-death experience that opened her eyes to a greater reality. And the wisdom she gained from both Jesus Christ and the Buddha. Each step on her journey had revealed a deeper truth. Life is not about perfection or control, but about presence, love, and connection. She realized that true awakening was not a single moment of revelation, but a lifelong process of learning, unlearning, and growing. The message Jesus had given her, combined with the teachings of the Buddha, had transformed her perspective on life. She had learned that the greatest gift one could give was the gift of love, unconditional, selfless, and boundless, a universal message, and wanted to share this message with the world, that love is the ultimate truth. It transcends all boundaries, religious, cultural, and personal. It is the force that unites humanity and connects us to the divine. Whether through acts of kindness, moments of forgiveness, or simple gestures of care, love has the power to heal both ourselves and the world around us. She reflected on the interconnectedness of all beings, a central tenet in both Buddhism and Christianity. In Buddhism, this idea is encapsulated in the teaching that all beings share the same essence and are part of a larger whole. In Christianity, it is expressed in the command to love one's neighbor as oneself. For Anne, these teachings were two sides of the same coin, guiding her to live with a heart full of compassion. Anne's final words, as Anne continued to live out the lessons she had learned, she found joy in the simplest things, a shared smile, a kind word, or the beauty of a quiet moment. She no longer sought to change the world through grand gestures, but through small acts of love that rippled outward in ways she could never fully see. I've learned, and said, that the path to peace and enlightenment isn't about avoiding life's challenges. It's about embracing them with an open heart. It's about choosing love, again and again, even when it's difficult. And it's about understanding that we are all connected, each of us a part of something greater than ourselves. If Anne's story has touched your heart, if her journey has made you reflect on your own path, we invite you to join our community. Subscribe to our channel, The Path to Buddhist Wisdom, where we explore stories, teachings, and insights that inspire love, compassion, and spiritual growth. By subscribing, liking this video, and turning on the notification bell, you help us bring meaningful content to more people around the world. Share this video with friends or family who might need to hear Anne's message today. And let's continue building a community grounded in kindness, respect, and understanding. What about you? Have you experienced moments of awakening or reflections on love and connection? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story and grow together on this journey. Thank you for watching. And remember, the path to wisdom begins with a single step, taken with love and courage. Until next time, stay mindful and stay compassionate.